Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of How To with London Youth Rowing. I'm one of the coaches here, Tom, and this week we're going to be talking about how to prepare for a race. To get us started, let's hear what tips and tricks Ben has.
Hi guys, it's Benjamin Pritchard here, coming to talk to you about some tips and tricks to get prepared for the regattas that you might have coming up in the future, and anything that I've learned along my way. And I guess the one thing I want to tell you is to try and stick to your usual routine. You know, going racing and regattas is a very exciting thing, and people often get a little bit hyped up about it in the days leading up. But my advice is to try and calm those nerves or excitement down as best you can. Stay off your screen time. You know, don't sit there scrolling through Instagram, getting really buzzed and hyped for the race. There's a good time for that, but in the days leading up to it, you want to kind of limit your excitement as best as possible, because when it comes to race day, you want to have that extra energy to really hit down the hammer. And so I like to take my books with me, or my magazines, and Gardener's World is the top favourite. So I take this with me when I'm on regattas, and I just spend my time trying to chill out, you know, in between racing. You know, you guys will do multiple races in a day, and it's important to, once you've raced, to come back down, you know, race, recover for your next race. So come back down, pick up your book, pick up your magazine, put those headphones in, and just try and come down a little bit before you start the hyping process all over again. And then the next bit of advice I can give you is that you're all going to be nervous. Everyone's nervous before they race. I'm nervous before I race. If people tell you they aren't, they're lying to you. Everyone is nervous before they race. But for me, as soon as I get to the start of the race, whether that's 2,000 metres or 1,000 metre course or whatever it may be, a calmness comes over me, because you've got to remember that the only way you can get home is by rowing down that course. So you've done all the hard work, you've done the training, you've been nervous leading up to the race, and then you get to the start line, and all you've got to think about is rowing home. Because that's the only way you're going to get back to your family and back to your food, is by rowing down that course. And that might sound too simple to believe, but that's exactly what I thought to the World Championships this year. I lined up in the middle lane, and I was really nervous. And then I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get back to shore is by rowing down this 2K course. So let's give it a go. And that's really helped me in all the races I've gone to. So that's my top tip for you.
Thanks, Ben. That was really interesting. Ellen, what do you recommend?
I'm Ellen Buttrick, and I'm a member of the GB rowing team. I row in the PR3 Mixed Cox 4, and I sit in the bow seat. I've been to 2 World Championships with the GB rowing team, so I've got a few tips to share with you about how to prepare for racing. I recommend writing a race plan, and that includes the warm-up beforehand as well. You know exactly what you're going to do. In the race plan of the race, it's a 2,000 metre one. You can either separate it into 100 metres or 500 metres, and then you can decide what kind of calls you might need in each section and what you might need to work on at that point. You could also decide, like, if someone's ahead of us, what are we going to do? Make sure you've got a really good playlist made up. So I like to listen to music in the hour before racing. I have 2 playlists, one to keep calm and to motivate me a little bit. It includes a lot of Beyonce. And then the next one is to, like, rile me up getting ready for racing, and I play that in, like, the 5-minute walk down to the boat. My teammates laugh at me, but I like to listen to All I Do Is Win by DJ Khaled. I'll listen to it every race, and by the time I get to the boat, all I can think is, all I do is win, and I'm definitely going to put the max amount of effort in to win. Make sure you stick to your normal routine. Set your alarm for the usual time. Have the same breakfast you always have. Stick to your stretching routine and do the warm-up you've practiced 1,000 times with your crew. There's no point changing it if you know it works. Just make sure that you enjoy it as well. We train all year for this short racing season, so don't get too worked up about it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself, and just make sure that you are enjoying every moment, because these are the best times of rowing. This is like the reason why we row, and you should definitely be enjoying every moment.
That's really useful, Ellen. I wonder what it looks like from a Cox's point of view.
Hi, I'm Erin, and I'm the Cox of the Paraolympic Mixed Cox 4. When we think about preparing for racing, my biggest top tip is to control the controllables and not worry about anything else. In racing, in rowing, whether we're talking about being on the water or preparing for an ergo test, there are things we can control and there are things we just can't. And the best way to prepare is to let go of all the things we can't manage and just focus on managing the things that we can. For me, when it comes to racing, I have a lot to do as a coxswain, making sure that all my athletes are warmed up and ready and safely on the start line, and then we have the race itself. I tend to separate the way I approach racing into essentially everything before the buzzer goes, and then I'm in the second phase, which is the race itself. If I can get my athletes to the start line as warmed up as well as they can be, really confident, strong position to go out and do the best they can, then I've done my job correctly. Then when it comes to the race itself, it's making sure that I execute the race plan, don't get too distracted about what our competition is doing or what the weather's doing, and instead control what I can control and try to make sure that my athletes perform as well as possible. For you guys, when you're preparing for an ergo test or an on-the-water race, think about what it is that you can have a handle on to make sure that you're as prepared as possible. So have you eaten the right breakfast? Have you eaten with enough time that your food will settle before you're about to race as well? Have you given yourself enough time to do a warm-up? Do you know what your warm-up is going to look like? If not, maybe sit down and think about what works best and helps you really get in the right frame of mind for racing. And then when it comes to the race itself, write a race plan. If you struggle to follow race plans, then make it really, really simple. Clear markers that you will remember even in the midst of racing as a little marker to go, right, I need to sit up, I need to kick on here. If you can prepare as well as you can and just control the things you can control, forget about the things you can't, like your opposition, the weather, or kind of any things that might kind of come out of nowhere and you didn't even expect, don't worry about them. Because if you've prepared as well as you can and planned and tried to be organised, then you'll be in the best possible place to reach whatever it is you're looking to achieve.
Thanks for that, Erin. Now let's have a look at a longer term view.
So, you've got a race coming up. Whether it's in a few months' time or in a few weeks' time, how do you prepare? Well, the preparation for your biggest race of the season starts months and months before the race even begins. To have a really good race, it relies on doing that consistent training the months leading up to it. I'm going to assume that you are doing that and you're confident in your ability to get stronger and fitter, row better on the water, row better with other people. So where I'm going to start my preparations is a few weeks out from the race, the last 3 or 4 weeks. 4 weeks out, what do you do? Well, first of all, there's still a lot of training to be done 4 weeks out from a competition, and sometimes it's the most important training of all. You've probably got a set crew by that point and you're doing lots more race pieces compared to in the winter too. Hopefully that means you can start really nailing your race pace, your race rhythm, how you move off from a start, and really start bedding those in. The earlier you can bed those patterns in, exactly what you're going to do, what length strokes you're going to hit off the start, the more you can repeat those and practice them, so that when you get to closer to the racing, they're second nature, you don't even have to think about it. Secondly, 3 or 4 weeks out, I start thinking about my recovery. It's a long way away from the race still, and lots can change in that meantime, but if I start trying to recover better 3 or 4 weeks out from that really big race, that means that by the time the racing rolls around, I'm raring to go, I am ready. Depending on what race you're competing in, you might have to travel there, you might have to make plans. Do you have to drive there? Do you need to load your boats? Is your coach coming with you? Is there somewhere you need to stay overnight? And 3 or 4 weeks out is definitely the time to have all of that sorted, so that you don't need to worry about it. It's also a good time to start thinking about some what ifs. If you're in a crew, it can be really useful to discuss what happens if you do a start and someone catches a crab. What happens if you're down off the start? What happens if during the middle of the race you're getting moved through? What's your move then? What happens if one of your crew is ill in the weeks leading up to the race? What happens if a piece of equipment breaks the day before? How are you going to replace it? What happens if your coach is ill and can't talk to you the day of the race? What happens if someone catches a crab off the start? It can be really useful to talk through the answers to these questions so you all know what you would do in that situation. And it can lead to a really high level of confidence in the last few weeks leading into a big race. The week of the race, that recovery must be really top notch. I commit fully to that recovery in that last week to make sure that I've got the maximum energy and maximum training benefit from all those weeks and months of training leading up to it. There's still that final chance to do those last few pieces, the last short, sharp, snappy stuff to really build your confidence leading into that final race. It's also a good time to make sure your final preparations are done. Have you cleaned your boat recently? Have you checked that all the bolts are all there? Have you checked that your Cox box has full battery? All sorts of things that you can check in the last few days before you leave for a big regatta or race. So you've reached race day. It's probably only a few hours until you race now. Of course, the most important thing is to know when your race is and what time you're boating. But if you've got those things out of the way, there are plenty of other things to be thinking about. It's often an alien environment. Where you race isn't usually where you train, so I try and keep my routine the same as normal. That means waking up at the same time if I have that luxury. It means eating similar things to what I would eat normally. It means going about my warm-up and my training in the same way the morning of the race. One thing to think about is also how you're getting to the race on the day. Perhaps it's better to travel the night before and sleep overnight somewhere so that you're well rested for the day of the race. Or maybe you're having to get up a little earlier than normal so that you can get there in time for the first round. One of the things that brings me the most confidence at the day of a race is having a really good race plan, one that's committed to by the entire crew, or just you if you're a single sculler. With my race plan, I like to have it written down in a way that I understand and am committed to, and I tend to read it a couple of hours before the race, just to make sure that I haven't missed anything. The final thing to consider on race day is what your water warm-up looks like. What time are you boating? What time is the latest that you can boat and still be okay? You might need to be flexible because there are other people boating for races at the same time as you, so being able to know what your limits are with those things can really soothe the nerves and soothe that anxiety. My final piece of advice is one that was told to me in my second year of rowing, and it's simply, all it takes is all you've got. Sometimes the preparation hasn't gone exactly to plan. Sometimes you don't quite feel right on the day. Sometimes someone else in your boat is ill and you have to make the best of it. But ultimately, all you can give in any race is everything you've got on the table that day. And if you do that, you should be proud of the results no matter what happens. If I have that mindset leading into a race, it means that I have no fears. I know all that I can give is all that I have that day, and it means that I can race better in the future. I hope those tips are useful.
That's all we've got today, guys. I want to say thank you for Ellen, Erin, Ben and Imogen for joining us today. I hope you found that interesting. If you found it interesting, you want to see more, subscribe and like the video, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.